So the green one's set to be next year. And then the yellow is the year after that.
Right. I'm just looking at that last section that's 5 years out. That seems, hopefully we find a way to accelerate it.
Now you sound like Doug.
Find the money.
Okay. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. This is a special council meeting. Today's date is May 24th, 2021, and it's 6 o'clock. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mayor D'Ambra?
Here?
Kyle Stone, Vice Mayor Stone?
Here.
Councilmember Brandon?
Here.
Councilmember Prince?
Here.
Councilmember Young?
Here.
Okay. May I have a motion to approve this evening's agenda?
Make a motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, it's unanimous. Okay, the first thing we're going to do this evening is I have communications from citizens. If you've submitted your cards, I'm going to remind you that you're limited to 3 minutes, and please make sure that you give us your name and address when you come up to the podium. So Lori, who do we have first?
Mark Sapiri.
My name is Mark Superior, and I live in the country club. My main concern this evening for this discussion is to be sure that the council has the full power intended under the code and the comprehensive development plan in hand and in mind to defend the long-term interest of this village in the review of development projects. I think we have not always vigorously defended these interests, and the consequences have been harmful to the village, and that now there is no margin for error in this process, or we will lose the great value of this village to rampant development visible everywhere along this coast, with a few notable exceptions, towns which by their example prove the great benefit of a municipal leadership that knows well how to apply its authority to reviewing development proposals. My sense is that the code as it is currently does give the council the authority necessary to defend well the long-term interests of the village. But of course that depends on the council enforcing the code and also the administration and the comprehensive development plan to the development proposals and in not acquiescing to variances detrimental to long-term village interests. If it were determined that the code does not enable the council to protect the interests that this council and all the residents care about for Tequesta in some respect, then I would suggest that the council put a hold on development for reason of zoning and rezoning review and recodification. It's a basic necessity for the health of the municipality to have a code that gives the council the power to defend the long-term interests of the village to the benefit of everyone. When the council defends the long-term interests of the village, everyone wins, not only the residents, but also developers and future developers benefit when the council pursues long-term interests, securing a healthy and beautiful community. And in this way, the council adds value to the life of the village and also to the property interest in the village. The council should not have to purchase land in order to ward off an existential threat. I would appreciate the opportunity, if it pleased the council, to comment after the discussion because there were no documents connected with the agenda for this meeting, and so I do not have the information that might be the object of your discussion. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Mark. Lori?
Thomas Bradford?
Good evening. My name is Thomas Bradford, 44 Chestnut Trail, Tequesta. And I want to read to you just tidbits of both state law and Tequesta law in regard to this matter. Chapter 163.32.20 allows for development agreements. 163.32.23, local government may adopt procedures for development agreements. 163.32.27 dictates developer agreement content. 163.32.99, a development agreement may not exceed 30 years. 163.20 3233 allows for laws to be retroactive to property under development agreement if a public hearing is held and it is determined, 1, new law not in conflict with laws and policies governing the development agreement don't prevent the development of land uses, intensities, or densities in the development agreement. New law is essential, has to be determined to be essential to public health, safety, and welfare, and it must state that. They are the new laws anticipated and provided in the development agreement. Number 4, local governments determine that its essential changes have occurred in pertinent conditions existing at the time of the development agreement adoption, which was 1999. Number 5, the development agreement is based on inaccurate information supplied by the developer. I know of no inaccurate information supplied by the developer. 16335, local government required to review the development agreement every 12 months for good faith compliance or failure to comply and result in revocation of the development agreement. Your code says, Chapter 62, 151, which was adopted August 8, 2013, almost 4 days shy of being 14 years after the adoption of the development agreement for this property. It states that the village may require the development agreement with 2 public hearings and also to revoke or modify a development agreement. 62-152, also 14 years after the fact, the development agreement content requirements, including duration, are in there. And then 62-153 mandates maximum 5-year duration, also almost 14 years after the fact. Section 156, 62-150, development agreement may be amended or canceled by mutual agreement of the parties. All of the above Tequesta laws adopted in 2013 by Ordinance 18-2013. Just one sentence. There's nothing in this ordinance indicating the village held a public hearing to determine any requirements to render the 1999 agreement null and void. In addition, there's nothing in the public record that you held 2 public hearings to revoke the development agreement, nor have you reviewed the development agreement every 12 months as required by law. I believe an argument can be made that if you move to revoke the development agreement, that the property owner would deem that to be a taking, i.e. condemnation, under the Burt-Harris Act of the state of Florida. The development agreement is a powerful tool. Regardless of what I have stated to you, and you have the tools in the existing code, everything to make happen, everything envisioned for an attractive village center, including open space sufficient to provide for a public park. Please proceed wisely. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Lori?
Pat Watkins.
Good evening, Pat.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Pat Watkins, 167 River Drive. I was not at the last meeting when this was discussed or workshop, but I understand that the council did not give the manager direction to get an appraisal on that property, and I do not understand why you wouldn't want to do that. Clearly what you're dealing with here, even if you have an appraisal that you know of, it's going to be an estate appraisal, which is totally different than a market value appraisal for a property. The village, as you all know, are very well aware of, we have very little green space. I would encourage you to do anything in your power to hold on to that property that's reasonable. Obviously, the residents are not going to allow you to, sit still and raise property taxes exorbitantly, but I do believe they would actually not balk at a small one if that's what it took. You have a piece of property there that a developer is going to have to put quite a bit of money buying into this real estate market. Building costs are up. If it's residential, it's overlooking Bridge Road. How much is he going to be able to sell these units for? And you can find in the amount of units, you've got to have your green space, your parking, all of that included. So I don't know that it's going to be super attractive to a developer. I could be wrong. Very well could be. However, I do think an appraisal is necessary, and I also think, just for the residents' sake, discuss this thoroughly, pros and cons, buying, not buying. You just have such an opportunity here that I hate to see it lost if it can be saved, but I think you definitely need the manager, Mr. Dunkley, to somehow provide some reasonable amount that you could even consider, and if it's way beyond that, it is, but at least think about it, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Pat.
Marcia Nielsen?
This is like old home week.
It is.
Marcia Nielsen, 94 Beachwood Trail. My problem is funding, and I keep hearing from Frank all about this wonderful grant, and I would like specifics. I'd like to know who has the grant, what the competition looks like, what the cycle is, because over the rec center, we heard grant, 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 and guess what? No grants. So grants are lovely when they come through, but let's admit it, the odds of getting one is not exactly in our corner. So you better have a plan B. So I would like specifics on this grant that I keep hearing about.
Okay. Thank you. Marcia, just on the rec center, just for clarification, there was a grant applied for the purpose of hardening. However, we did not apply for grants for the rec center for its construction, because to do so would have limited our ability to control who had access and who did not. And if we wanted to make it resident only, we wanted to have that ability to do so. So that was the rationale behind that. The grant that you're specifically asking about would have to be applied for in the new cycle. It's a grant that allows for the acquisition of property.
And who is the grantor?
It comes through the state of Florida. I don't have the specifics in front of me. I can give you a general overview, and I can get you more specific information. There's multiple grants that could be applied for. In fact, one of the things I've asked Jeremy to do is to have Ryan come to our next workshop and actually provide an overview of all the grant opportunities that are out there for us.
It would be good, because I went online and all I saw was all the Florida ones all had 200,000 and stuff.
No, this grant, if you're a municipality under 10,000 people, you could theoretically apply for up to 100% funding. However, they score it. So to your point, who gets selected and how. There's a scoring system that exists. And if you're under 10,000 and you match 25% and they provide 75, that obviously helps you in the scoring system. It'll help you better position yourself for the grant.
Well, I will be at the workshop for Ryan, and I'd like specifics. If you
Okay.
will, please.
All right.
Thank you.
Very good.
Can I
Lori?
ask a question to you real quick? Don't we
Sure.
have two grant writers?
We did.
Should we not have both of them?
We can. Ryan, I know, he has a lot of experience in this arena, but we could have both of them there.
Just so
Yeah,
they're on the same
absolutely.
page even?
Yeah, that's fine. That's a good suggestion. No other cards? Okay. Okay, we're going to close the communications from citizens. Jeremy's going to, I know, step in and provide an overview, but before he does, I'd kind of like to hear from each of the council members kind of what your current perspective is on Paradise Park, specifically as to whether you think, and again, we haven't gotten cost numbers or anything of that nature, but is it just a general idea as to kind of where you stand and what your thinking is around Paradise Park at this point? Understanding we don't have cost numbers yet, and we, still have to obviously line up funding, but is it something that you're generally in favor of? Is it something you're predisposed not to be in favor of? I'm just curious as to where everybody stands. So Bruce, can we start with you?
Without any additional information based on what I know now and what projected cost of the potential cost of the land is currently plus developmental cost, I really don't think it's something that I'd be in favor of spending, $3.5 to $4 million to purchase the land and then turn around and then spend another $500,000 to $1 million developing the land. We right now have been struggling a little bit, in trying to get a balanced budget, which, we have, and then, trying to get our reserves caught up, which we should get that done this year. And, and here we go and start taking on additional expenses and stuff. The timing is never good, I don't think, hardly ever, when you trying to spend money. I sit back and I watch other government agencies and stuff, and our federal government spending trillions and trillions of dollars that we don't have. And I've always been, kind of, could never really understand how they could just keep spending money that they don't have, and borrowing and borrowing and borrowing, and our great-great-grandkids are gonna be paying the tab for all this bailout stuff. That's getting a little bit off the subject, but bottom line is, we don't have the money, and the debt service on that, could be anywhere from $200,000 to $250,000 a year just for the purchase of it. And then, of course, then again, you've got your developmental cost, and then, of course, then you got your maintenance costs and stuff on top of that. So unless I can be convinced otherwise, I mean, as I sit right now, I don't think that I would vote in favor of purchasing the property.
Lori?
I'm not at my final decision, but obviously in a perfect world, I would absolutely love the village to have that back again. We used to have it. It's a shame we don't have it anymore. I foresee so many potential opportunities that the village could utilize the property. But again, that's a much more in-depth conversation, like Mr. Prince is saying, costs and whatnot. But obviously, in an ideal world, I'd love to have us have it.
Molly?
I'm kind of like Lori. I haven't fully made up my mind. Very high level. The pros I see are, and this is just my personal opinion, of course, I think you would really need community input, but I would envision it as an urban park, like a very amazing urban park, and would really strengthen our community. Some of the cons are the obvious, the cost. Or potentially would purchase land that we have no even remote concept for, which I think is kind of risky because it could just sit and then maybe that doesn't pan out, and that was a bad investment. And then what would be the loss in revenue of a development that would actually potentially happen there with, and new businesses that wouldn't be able to come, and housing. So those are just kind of high level pros and cons that I'm weighing. And I do think, I know Jeremy sent some of the survey results, and it was interesting. It was a very small sampling. I think it was like 220 something people, but it appeared 63% were in favor. So it would be nice to have a larger sampling from the community too. I just want to make that point because I thought it was interesting.
Kyle?
So I think we're here at this point for a variety of different things, but if you go back in history, I don't think there was a good process of planning for events like this, and I think we're in a position now. If we look financially, we've got, like Mr. Prince said over there, we still have an unfunded balance that needs to be higher, meaning our emergency fund. We have petitions now being passed around that our roads need to be paved and milled. We have Remembrance Park that has nothing's ever been done to it. We have Tequesta Park that has fallen down and fallen apart to a certain degree that I think needs to be repaired to a high level. We've got, you can even say Linear Park. Probably no one knows who a Linear Park is. We have that. Those are all things that we have not done a good job of maintaining because we haven't had the funds to maintain them. So I don't see how we have the ability to go out and purchase something, $3.5, $4 million, $5 million, $6 million, whatever that price is, and do that with a good conscience. Whether there is this grant, no grant, I don't see how that would be in good conscience to do that. We've got year over year increases to our overall payroll at a rate that exponentially is greater than the property values. We want to keep and maintain our employees. So you've got that. You've got raised taxes. I just don't see that there's a happy medium. So I still also, in addition to that, I haven't seen a good reason or purpose for this piece of property other than the Tequesta Fest and Chili Cook-Off, which are great events that I think we can try to accommodate elsewhere within our boundaries. So I don't see that. Not to mention what Molly's talked about is that loss of development that could be beneficial in holding ground on certain areas and doing things that Mr. Bradford has talked about to make sure that we've got a very good development that meets our codes, that is going to be a very high benefit to our residents and the people in that area. I mean, this land has been, what, back and forth since '88, if not longer?
98, I think.
98? I think there might be some things before that, but, okay, long time.
Yep.
And it's one of those things that if we could have done something, we've had plenty of opportunity to do it, or at least be at the table and present something, or save for it, or plan for it, or knew that this day was going to come, and we didn't do it. And it's unfortunate. I'd love to be in the position to be able to do something fun, even though I haven't heard what those ideas are. I'm not there yet.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to get a sense of where people stood. My feelings are along the lines of Lori and Molly. I think that there is a potential for a high-use, what do you want to call a mini Grand Central urban park for that area, which I think would be extremely beneficial, not only for the residents, but also for the surrounding businesses. I've talked to a number of the businesses, and that's what they would like to see unfold there. I think some of your points, Kyle, are good, but I do think, for example, we take Tequesta Park. Tequesta Park is leased land. We do not own that land. It's owned by the state.
When does the lease come up?
The lease comes up in another
35 years?
40 years, I believe.
How old will you be?
But the point is, if it's state land and it's open to anybody, should the village be undertaking an investment of $2, $3, $4, $5 million itself to bring that park up to, let's say, some type of high-level standard that you mentioned? Personally, I don't think that particular parcel of land, while it's valuable to us, I don't think, given the fact that it's open to everybody, it's not just Sequoia residents, it's Martin County, anybody in Palm Beach County, anybody across the state. And it's state land, that funding needs to come from somewhere other than the backs of the village residents, which is why I've spoken before about meeting with both Senator Powell and Representative Snyder to see if we can't target either earmarks or grants. I've had some discussions with some people locally, and they're saying that the state right now is kind of a wash with money because of the influx of dollars from the federal government. There are a number of grant opportunities that are emerging. West Palm Beach just got a grant for its park down there in Riviera to the tune of almost $18 million. So I think there's going to be opportunities for us to try and address some of those areas without putting the burden on the back of the village residents. I think...
The one thing I'd add to that, though, is that by improving those fields, we could invite families into our parks on a daily basis, which then helps support our community, especially when we're talking bridge closing for a period of time.
No, I agree with that. And I think
it's a huge opportunity, and I've talked to a lot of residents that want to see us move forward with that.
No, I think it's important. I think it is important we move forward. Again, you're bringing up the issue of funding, however, and where the resources are going to come from. And that's the question. Is that where we want to put village resources and money when it's land that, we don't own? I think as far as Paradise Park, what happened in the past is kind of water under the bridge. It wasn't economically a very sound arrangement that was struck years ago, but be that what it may. I think in the last 10 years there were, again, we got to remember we had the deep recession that impacted the village. It impacted our revenue stream. We obviously deferred some infrastructure and some capital projects in order to manage through that process. We're now coming back online, I think, in a much better financial position. But there were discussions with Mr. Zuccarelli on a number of occasions about Paradise Park, about reacquiring it. But unfortunately, the value he put on it and the value that we put on it were quite different. And while Mr.
What the value was that he put on it then?
He had a value of close to $2.8 million, I believe.
So anything over that would be too expensive?
At the time when we were in the deep recession, grants didn't seem to be readily available, and we certainly weren't in a position to underwrite or finance that. So while there were conversations that never happened, I know Mr. Zuccarelli came in a couple of times with proposals for developments, which were not in accord with, quote unquote, the developer agreement. He was looking for variances. He wanted to go 6 stories. He wanted to do a number of things to make it, as former Mayor Watkins said, to make it financially viable. And those things actually never came to pass. So I guess where I am is, again, I think we're at a point where we need to establish what the fair value of that land is. So we need to, my view would be we need to spend a little bit of money to get the appraisal so we can see what the value is. We need to pursue funding opportunities that don't rely on increased taxes from village residents. I think, to Molly's point and Lori's point, we need to get out and really educate the public, just like we did with the community center. We need to develop a concept for the park. Ultimately, if we decide we really want to pursue it, we need to go out, educate the public, give them a chance to give us their input and their feedback, and come up with something that, you know, we have a strong community support for. For the recreation center, we ended up getting 88% of the community say, yes, we want this recreation center. And that was a result of the hard work that people did to really go out and communicate, you know, that the concept around it, but it was also all the input and feedback we got so that we were really able to tailor it to the needs of our residents. So I think at this point, Molly, you're all right. There's a lot that's unknown here, but I think the first step into trying to make it known is to get the appraisal so we kind of understand what the property value is that we're looking at. Personally, I don't want to see 1 inch of that space developed. You know, we keep talking about green space. There's a number of people that have come in here and talked about green space, okay? And yet, what I'm hearing from some is, hey, we're okay developing this land. This is the largest parcel, other than where the reserve is going in, the largest parcel of undeveloped land we have in this village. And I think it would make a beautiful park. And again, part of the reason we haven't used it more, residents haven't used it more, is because at this point it's undeveloped. It's just a strip of grass, basically. But it has so much potential that we could move beyond that. So anyways, that's, I guess that's my sense.
How many understand the appraisal? So we go get this appraisal, does the seller have to sell it to us for that price?
At this point, the agreement says that if the seller gets an offer, we have right of first refusal. But I guess one of the questions is if developers, to Mayor Watkins' point, if the economics of that parcel don't really make a lot of sense, will they get an offer or a high offer?
So we've seen drawings of a family coming in and giving us a 4-story building on US 1, and they're not using it for any revenue source at all. So it's very possible that they could put this building in and, you know, and family office.
No, I mean, that's very possible. I'm just saying they have not received, as far as we know, a firm offer to purchase that land. There is that right of first refusal, but once we have an appraisal and if we feel collectively that it's a fair value and we understand how we're going to be able to fund the acquisition and development, you know, then we can make a determination as to how we want to go forward. But again, without having a handle on the value, I think that's the first step that we need.
Let me ask you another question. The first right of refusal is only good while we still have a lease with them?
That's unclear. If you read the lease literally, it would imply that it continues beyond. However, normally when you have a clause like that in a lease, there's got to be some consideration given, and the question would be, what is the consideration? So I think at this point in time, there's a question mark around that.
What's our time frame on the agreement?
September of this year.
So we've got until September of this year to determine, number one, what the value of it is, and then what we can justifiably pay for it, and if there's any grant money available.
Unless
and
we,
get a contract.
unless we're able to, unless they're willing to extend the lease for a period of time, knowing that we have an interest because the manager's already sent a letter indicating we do. If they're willing to extend that lease, that would give us more time, obviously, than to develop this whole thing.
I hear a lot of ifs, though. That makes me nervous.
Well-
If they'll do this, if they'll do that.
Well, I think, Jeremy, do you want
Would
to?
they extend the lease?
I can ask. I don't know. The last conversation we had, it was before they really committed to selling. They were interested in extending the lease. Since then, they've come to the village and saying they want to sell it. So I don't know if they'll still entertain extending the lease at this point. So if that's the direction council wants to go, I can ask that question to them.
The only reason I'm asking, it took us 2, 3, 5 years to do the community center. I don't think that we have that kind of time, but I'd be curious to see if they would extend the lease for a year.
I think, Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that Betsy promised Dave that they would make the site available for both Tequesta Fest and the Chili Cook-Off, correct?
That's right.
So that's, you know.
In writing?
That's November.
No.
I don't know that it's in writing,
It should be in writing then.
but we can, but.
She says that they pay the insurance, always have, for the chili cook-off, and she's already sent in the payment for the chili cook-off, is what she told me. Not in writing, but that's what she told me, so.
I'd feel better if it was in writing.
But would anybody be opposed to asking to see if they would extend the lease to give us more time to get community feedback?
No, I think that's exactly where we need to go with this, to see.
I'd rather do that than pay an appraisal
Well, you're
versus asking them how much they want to sell it for.
Well, again, I think one doesn't necessarily eliminate the other, right? I think we should look for an extension of the lease. I think we also should get, the amount of money we're talking about, Jeremy will get into this, but the amount of money we're talking about for an appraisal is not substantial.
Well, one
And-
thing that I would think though, too, is that when you talk to them, Jeremy, you know, number one, asked about the extension of the lease. And then secondly, so have y'all entertained what you want for it? Are you going to accept an appraisal for it? Are you going to go with the highest bidder on it? I mean, so find out from them how their pulse are beating, you know, and what their time is. I mean, when do you want to sell and close this thing? I mean, you know, fill them out so we can better understand what we're dealing with. And I mean, right now, we don't know if they're going to accept an appraisal or not. I mean, you know, right now, everything's selling above appraisal amount. So if we go out and get an appraisal, then somebody comes in and say, well, I'll offer you $500,000 more for it, and we'll pay you cash for it, or whatever the case may be. So, I mean, I think that we need to, before we spend a lot of time on it, I mean, well, you know, I don't mind spending, you know, as much time on it, you know, that's necessary, but we start going down this rosy path and spending money, you know, that, I don't even mind paying for an appraisal on it. But, you know, are they, if they're going to accept an appraisal amount.
Right. And then I'd also be curious if they would be willing to sell one parcel versus all, or are they planning on selling all three together?
And that was gonna be my biggest question, once we find out how much each parcel is, how much they want for each parcel. Because let's say, worst case scenario, we can't do all three, can we at least find a way to get a part of it? Save some of it. And I would like to just address something that Mrs. Watkins brought up, your concern of, do you think someone would want to put even residential backed up to Bridge Road? I'm gonna say yes, only because Mr. Zuccarelli already had that concept and he found a way to do it. And I absolutely think that a developer, and I can name some names because we all know which ones are chomping at the door, would definitely put as much as they can there. And I'm not saying we should do this to avoid that, I just think it could be used for residents, but I do think there is a way to put residential there. Whether I would live there or not, probably not.
Well, I think that, you know, Councilman Prince made this statement last time. If we do not acquire it, it will be acquired and developed. There's no question about that. So I think the question.
So they would develop it even whatever price they paid it for? You think it's doable?
Well, a developer, if they acquire it, are certainly going to acquire it with the intent to develop it. They're not going to acquire it with the intent of sitting on it.
Well, I mean, you got Rude spot out there on County Line Road.
That's a different situation. That's got a toxic spill on the land, and that's.
But he paid too much for it, probably.
He did.
So, I mean, same kind of a situation.
Well,
It's possible.
a little different, because they're in a difficult situation because of the toxic spill on the land that's made the development of that property extremely challenging. So that's kind of apples to
Or
oranges,
we're
I
paying
think.
for another property, it's the same thing, price expense, cost expense.
No, but I'm saying that it's a different ballgame for the developer if they acquire this
The
piece.
expense to develop, it's gonna
Yeah.
cost more.
I mean, we talk about green space. I would like to see us maintain this as green space. You know, when we look at the village, we really are blessed, because when we talk about green space, if you look at the space within the village, you know, you probably like a little more than we have, but I'd certainly like to have Paradise Park as part of it. But I think sometimes we forget we're really blessed, because we've got Jonathan Dixon to the north, which is almost like an extension of Tequesta in some ways. We have Coral Cove. So we really are blessed with a tremendous amount of open space, green space, water access that this community has that many others do not boast of. But again, within the space that we control, yes, I think it's beneficial to be an acquirer whenever, we can, and if it makes financial sense.
So are you proposing that it just stay as green space?
I'm saying it's green and we develop it as a park.
What would that park look like?
Well, I
think-
had some ideas, and this is just like an urban park. So you have, like, you would have walkways, you have shade, like low maintenance, you know, native landscaping, so it's not a high cost to do that. You could do a little water fountain. I mean, a lot of residents have asked for like a little, you know, something like downtown West Palm, a nice little fountain. You could have a concession area, maybe more of a permanent food truck set up. You could have a little plaza for events and
An amphitheater.
concerts. I mean, there's all, like, look up urban parks. I mean, it's really quite amazing. And So I mean it's really, it's not just a park, it's not just a green space, it is green space, but it's also very actively used.
Right.
And, for all kinds of different uses, and, the whole community would use it, and I think it would really strengthen the community. That's personally just my idea and what I've looked up and what I think is cool. We really need community input on what it would ultimately be, but.
Yeah, and I think what you just said is the key, because no one person, whether they're in the audience or on this podium, speaks for every resident in this village, okay? None of us do. We all have people we talk to, we all get input from various individuals and sources, but I think, again, the key is community input, and I think the community center was a little different situation where there was complexities in that. It started at Remembrance Park, we moved it down to Constitution, but the bulk of the work that we did was done within, maybe 6 months. Then it went over to council, and then obviously council had it for a bit. I think we can develop a concept and go to the public with this, go to our residents with this, get that input, and if we can get the lease extension, I think we can do it within a reasonable period of time, which, as Marcia said, gives us a chance to identify the funding sources as well and make sure we get those lined up so that that acquisition becomes, has a minimal impact on the finances of the village.
Do we have a feel for the percentage of usage by the citizens and stuff? I mean, is it 10%, 30%? What percentage of the residents here in the village that y'all think would actually use that if we developed into the level that you're talking about, Molly?
I think we'd get pretty good usage.
I think a lot of people would.
Pretty good is,
Well, I mean,
like,
Bruce, honestly, I have no way to give you, I don't have no way to quantify that. I mean, I know that the businesses along Bridge Road, they would like to see it. Obviously, the building that Mr. Zuccarelli owned, I mean, you've got a restaurant in there, you've got the drugstore, you've got the school. I think they'd be in favor of it. You've got the office building on the west side. I just think if you develop it properly, you would see a lot of utilization.
My opinion is urban villages could be very awesome. They can pertain to all ages. When I say small urban village, my vision would be not 4 stories, but something maybe 1 or 2, and not the whole property, something that outskirts it. So the inside is all green space. And green space can be used for 1,000 different things, and it can be used year round. So when we talk about our residents keep asking us, we only use it for Tequesta Fest and chili cook-off. It could be used for so much more year round. We are in Florida, we don't have snow. We could be doing so much more. We could do sports things, we could do music things, we could do community cookouts. It could be everything. If you have all those businesses that are existing, you're bringing people to that center of the village, which enhances and is also supporting everything around it. But it doesn't need to be huge, but there's no age limit and there's no demographic, so to speak. It depends on what you're hosting event-wise or activity-wise.
Well, that sounds great, and I love your idea. But, we're not talking about a couple of 100,000. We're talking about millions and millions. And then, and then we've got to maintain it. And, doing something like, you almost need a director to manage that.
So after I get more costs and financial options, I mean, maybe it's possible down the road if we did acquire it, we have a conversation with partnering with a developer to develop something we choose, if that makes sense.
I still don't know if that's the role of government, especially for a municipality. That's just me.
Well, I'd like to know, I still don't know what the appraisal costs, so can Jeremy present?
Yeah, so
his-
Jeremy, why don't you step in here, because we've had a chance to have some conversations.
So last meeting, I was tasked with, in my count, 3 different things. One, to get an appraisal value, what it would cost to get an appraisal of those properties. I thought at the time we were discussing 2, and so the appraisal for both the green spaces was $3,000. I'm guessing council wants to go ahead and include the parking area as well, and so I can include that in the appraisal. I'm guessing you're no more than another $1,000, so probably tops $4,000. The appraisal I got was for the 2 green spaces for $3,000. And so if that gives you an idea of what we're talking about costs. I did not get the parking lot included. I'm guessing that council wants to include the parking just with some of the conversations that I've had recently. Second thing we were tasked with, and this is more on Keith's area, was the, I guess, the validity of the development agreement and the master plan. Keith looked through the documents, you guys have that, so I'm just gonna summarize that he thought that the development agreement has expired, and so, you know, it'd be a new development that would be coming in if somebody was to come in and go through a new process. The third thing was a look at, I guess, cost estimates and how it would fit into our budget. At 2 million, 3 million, 4 million, Mr. Stone asked for those, so I have prepared that. We can look at those if you choose, we can do that and just kind of give us an idea. So really, we're not talking about the general fund per se, we're talking about our capital improvement plan. So we've come up with this plan in the last few years to have a sustainable capital improvement plan. You know, we have our utility tax, and we have, we'll start with 2 million. We have our utility tax, and we have our infrastructure surtax that sunsets into 2025. And so we have our revenues associated each year, and then we have our projected expenses. And so, man, I'm not doing good. All right. And currently, we use the general fund operating to offset these capital improvement plans. We've kept a steady stream across there. So you see our revenues and expenditures. So at $2 million for Paradise Park plugged into the other items that we have planned for our 5-year plan, you see where we are, plus and minuses. So the next year we'd be upside down. Then we'd have some positive. As you start getting into $3 million, you'll see that it doesn't look much better with a $3 million purchase of that. And then $4 million we actually did over a 15-year period instead of a 10, so stretch it out. But it's very close to that as well. So, you know, just plugging those into what we've talked about the last 2 years of having a capital improvement plan and having a sustainable plan, you know, we'd have to make some business decisions.
And
But
that's
that
the
assumes we
developer.
bear the full cost.
I'm sorry?
That assumes we bear the full cost.
Right, so, and that's assuming that we get it for $4 million and not more.
Right, but there's no grants involved here. This is just that the village has to pay it
Yep.
outright.
And no development cost,
Right.
and no maintenance
These are
cost.
just a straight 2 million, 3 million, 4 million doesn't, you know, the maintenance costs would turn over into the general fund side, which, you know, we'd have to look at what we're doing over there, and, you know, even if we really wanted to get serious about it, have a staff member trying to book it all the time, and, you know, just depending. So, you know, depending on whatever scenario you came up with, we'd have to come up with an operating plan for it.
Is that possible, hypothetical number per parcel, or is it for the whole thing?
I don't know. I'd hate to commit to anything, because I don't know what the appraisal is, and we haven't done that yet. You know, I've had some conversations with the developer or with the owner of it, and, I mean, it could be north of $4 million. I mean, so, I mean, you could be anywhere north of $4 million, shy of 6 or 7, so, and I don't know yet, so I don't want to throw out numbers like I just did. So I'd
Take
like
them
to
back.
stay away from doing that until we get an appraisal and actually have a more serious conversation. I have had some of those questions. I have asked the developer. At this point, they haven't really committed to anything. They were working on their own appraisal. They had a state appraisal done. I don't think they loved those numbers, so they were working on a sales appraisal. And so I don't know, the last conversation didn't sound like they were still pursuing that they were gonna hang their hat on the state appraisal. But they haven't shared that with me yet.
So for the record, these are just hypothetical numbers.
Hypotheticals, total hypotheticals. This was based on Mr. Stone's request last time to come up with 2 million, 3 million, 4 million. Looks like Hugh outdone himself and put $1 million in there as well on the other side. So we have put together those scenarios and kind of just, it's a really good picture of where we are with our capital improvement plan, you know, and the plans that we had kind of moving forward and still could have moving forward. And this doesn't include some of the beautification, tree canopies, Tequesta Park, you know, some of the things that we've recently talked about. These are just the, you know, some of the streets and equipment that we have. So I think there's still some holes in this, but I think it gives you a good picture.
Well, one thing that I was kicking around today is that if we decided not to pursue the purchase of Paradise Park because it didn't work out for the village from a financial standpoint, I mean, you know, if we were loaded up with money, you know, I mean, I wouldn't be contemplating this. Well, I still would, because, you know, you got to decide whether or not it's the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. Doesn't matter how much money you have over here in the bank. You didn't get that money by being, you know, a spendthrift, you know, where you go out and just blowing your money and stuff. You amass a little bit of money by being frugal in the financial decisions, stuff that you make, and you don't start throwing it away because, you know, this is what we want. But, you know, we've got Remembrance Park over there that's been sitting there for all this time. We own that. Why don't we take and maybe put some money into that and develop that? It's closer to where all the residents live. You're going to have to drive to Paradise Park. You're not going to roll your stroller down there from Tequesta Country Club or back up here at Bermuda Terrace. That's a long stroll. And so, you know, it's a long way to go to get there. You know, most of the people that are going to want to go there, in my opinion, you're going to have to drive over the railroad tracks, cross over Dixie, and you're going to get over in there. But, you know, it's not as conveniently located. To me, that's a negative. If it was more in the center part of the town where the bulk of the population is at, I think you would get a lot more usage out of it. But again, you know, we already own one. And here we're talking about buying another one. That one's been sitting vacant as long as God made dirt. And, you know, here we are talking about buying another piece and spending anywhere from $3 to $4 million just to buy the dirt plus development cost. We've got one that we've not ever done anything with, and we want to go out and buy more. Come on, guys. I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but, you know, I'm open for a discussion and argument, and convince me otherwise, but we got a long way to go to get me sided up to buy that property for $2 million, $3 million, $4 million.
And you know I'm going to agree with that based on my comments already. But I think it's really sad that we're losing, if we do lose this park, and it's unfortunate. And what I would like to see is that the revenue that let's say we don't buy it, and somebody comes in and does develop it, and they, you know, $1 million or $10 million brings in what, $60,000 or so in additional revenue to the village of Tequesta. Have that go towards Parks and Rec, and have that maybe pass a policy or something that we would take all that revenue from those 3 lots to put into the Parks and Recs to be able to maintain and improve that area.
I think
That'd be my suggestion if we don't get there.
Bruce, I think to your point, I don't know that it's an either or. I think Remembrance Park, obviously, even if we develop it, it's going to have limited parking there. So you're right. The people that are going to use it are the same people who live immediately around it. And a lot of people are still going to go down to Constitution Park, especially if they have kids. I think this park serves a different purpose. I think, you know, the way Molly described it, I think was very apt in terms of the purpose it would serve. And I think you would find that as people come into the commercial area of the village, you now have, like I said, this mini Grand Central type park that you can go and enjoy and utilize as you're visiting these various businesses. The other thing we've talked about is, you know, controlling development in this village. And quite honestly, I think most of the development I want to see it on a US 1. I think this parcel is a gem. I think it's very unique, and I really think if we lose it, we will regret it. I think 10 years from now, people will look back and say, how did you guys let it go? Now, I'm assuming we can get it at a reasonable cost. And again, as you said, 2, 3, 4 million, we don't know what it's going to be because, one, we don't have the appraisal yet. So I'm going to say that probably the action coming out of this tonight, I think, should be.
We know it's more than 2.8, right? That's what he was willing to sell it for 5, 6, 7 years ago.
That's what he said.
Correct.
But
that was his value.
That was his value way back when. What I'm saying is I think getting an appraisal, which is a minimal cost, gives us some information that we can then utilize to put ourselves in a better position. Second thing I think we need to do is see if we can get the extension on the lease, because if we can get the extension on the lease, no longer are our backs up against the wall from a time standpoint. Now we have the time to develop funding sources, and we have time to develop the concept, and we have time to get out to the public and get their input. And I think, you know, that would be the most effective way to go forward. Again, we may very well find that we can get grants that'll cover, like I said, the bulk of the costs.
How long does it usually take to find out about the grant money?
It depends on, the grants get applied for, and then there's a decision-making process. We'd have to see what grants we'd be eligible for at this point. The grant that I spoke of earlier with the 75%, the last round of that closed off, I believe, in December. Is that correct, Jeremy?
Mm-hmm.
So this would be the next round. And usually you have to wait for the state legislature to get done with its session to see how much money is available. Well, they've now concluded that, so we ought to have some sense of what, what the options or the opportunities might be.
Like I said, I'm fine. I mean, convince me otherwise, if you can make it justifiably affordable for us to go in and purchase it, develop it, and maintain it. I'm not against it buying it. I mean, I'd be all over the idea if we can financially afford it. But right now, the numbers that I'm seeing, right now, as it sits right now, if we had to go out and buy it, we can't afford it.
No, I mean, if we had to go out and spend $6 million and it came out of our pocket, I would agree with you.
I'd say $4 million.
Or $4 million,
Yeah.
or $5 million. But again, the goal here is to find funding sources that would allow us to minimize how much we'd have to spend out of our own pocket.
If we're going to go out and do that, then I think we need to decide what we're going to do along with Remembrance Park as well. We could go in and turn it into our own dog park rather than having one across the road over there, in Morton County, and have our own little park that's conveniently located, and right here in town. And
Well,
who was one of the butterfly park or something the other day? We're talking about planting stuff and putting butterflies in it. It's not up to me to call you guys out. I'm not the mayor, so I mean, if you want y'all to let y'all talk, you can have to call y'all out. I see your hand out there.
On the council, anybody can call anybody out.
Okay, well, go ahead.
I think, to your point though, I think when we go out and communicate, we don't have to limit it to Paradise Park. If we have the time, we can talk about Paradise Park, develop a concept, present that, but we can talk about Remembrance Park too. I mean, there's no reason we can't roll those things together, talk about what we might do there. I know there's a concept that's already been developed for Remembrance Park. But it hasn't really been vetted through the community to see if that's what they're interested in doing, so.
I think reaching out to the community about Remembrance Park
Yeah,
makes
that
a lot of
needs to start
sense.
as well.
I know, since I work kind of there in the corner, I see dog after dog after dog being walked along those corners. The idea of a dog park there sounds like a great idea too, but it'd be interesting to see what the
Well,
community says.
dogs, are they allowed in Constitution Park?
I don't think so.
So, I mean, if you got a dog, and everybody that I know, I mean, there's more dogs walk by than people anymore, it seems like. I mean, they've got multiple dogs on their leashes going through my neighborhood, so I think it'd be great to have a nice, place where they could go and
It's near the
have a relaxing time with their dogs, let dogs run and play a little bit.
All right, Tom?
Mr. Mayor, I want to leave you and your colleagues with something that I hope makes you feel good and gives you hope. First of all, Molly is spot on relative to the term urban park. I know most Tequesta people don't care for that word urban, but I know what she means when she says that, and that was sort of what was envisioned back in 1999. But here's the thing. You all know that the land is just over 3 acres, the totality of the 3 undeveloped parcels. That means, number one, that mandatory that the developer, whoever that may end up being, has to comply with PUD mixed-use requirements, okay? The minimum landscaping for that is 25% landscaping. Minimum. The key word is minimum, okay? So imagine if you were able to squeeze 5% more out of this developer and made it 30%. Do you realize that you're talking about something that is almost the exact same size as one of the 3 parcels? And you can get them, and you know why it's beneficial to the developer? It means if he gives you this urban park, he doesn't have to maintain it. And neither do the businesses that are around it or the condominium owners that may be there. It would be your park, you operate it, you own it, and it would be beneficial to him. And so the good news is if you do your job and you follow the code, you can get this sort of thing in lieu of, just a lawn, like a single fence. You can get more than that, so that's the good news. So have hope and just follow the code and you can get it.
Okay.
I really feel that way.
All right, Tom, thank you. Mark?
Thank you. So I just wanted to follow up on what Tom has said, to try to go to the point on green space, because I think we have the same goal here. I would love that to be a park, right? So, but I want to try to add something to the understanding of green space, and to explain why we seem to have a disagreement. And it's really this. From my perspective, and the perspective of many people, the most important reason for the green space, and it's really a vital interest for this village, is not the kind of utility we've been talking about. It's restoring habitat, critical habitat for the life, not just of human beings, but of all the beneficial insects and animals that make this coast really beautiful, what is really desirable, and what is really disappearing. Okay? So there's a world of difference. You know, there are all kinds of different green spaces. Like a soccer field is basically a dead zone. The lawn is a dead zone. It's literally a dead zone. It's dead to life. Okay? So you mentioned, Mayor, that, well, we're lucky because we're next to Dickinson Park, and we are really lucky because we're next to Dickinson Park and the preserve. But I would say that actually, that's a critical reason to make the most of Tequesta in restoring habitat, because we are strategically located, not just close to the state park and the reserve, but right in the estuary. And so we can have an outsized impact on improving life, the health of the land, the health of the water that everybody loves here, by prioritizing restoring habitat. So for example, the initial exchange that was presented made no sense at all from that perspective. And let me say also that restoring habitat improves everybody's property. Because for example, if you restore habitat in one spot, the effect benefits communities all around it. It benefits insects, it benefits the plants, the animals all around it. It cleans the water, literally. So the initial proposal that we were invited to consider was effectively looking at Remembrance Park and the parcel. It's a 1 acre parcel along Tequesta Cypress. That was 1 acre, altogether 2.75 acres more, right? Because Remembrance is 1.75 acres. So it made no sense at all to exchange what we could dedicate to restoring habitat, providing a critical link for biodiversity between the state park and the preserve, exchange that for something which most likely wasn't going to serve that purpose. Because, for example, Constitution Park, it does have some green space, but it is in no way completely dedicated to restoring habitat, which is the crucial point, if you don't mind, one moment. So, for example, what Tom has just said, we can achieve what you want, the kind of green space you want, 30% of the space. Easily you can make that claim under the code and the comprehensive development plan at no cost, and without losing all of the other benefits that kind of proposal would bring to the village. So I just wanted to put on the table and ask you really to prioritize the interest of restoring habitat. That's what really matters in the green space.
Thank you, Mark. Again, I would agree with your comments about restoring habitat, although I don't think that and the idea of an urban park, especially the way Molly described it, which I concur with, they're not exclusive to one another. They can complement each other. And I think it's also important when we talk about green space, I agree. The natural environment, it's important for the natural environment, but it's also important for the human environment, that we have places we can go and enjoy ourselves. And I think that's what Paradise Park can become. Again, I'll simply disagree that I don't want to see development, just personally, my opinion, I don't want to see development there. I think we should take every inch of that space and turn it into something really magnificent for the residents of the village, assuming we can do it cost effectively, and that's something that we have to be able to determine.
Well, I certainly like the alternative that Thomas brought up, and the fact that 25 to 30% of the land that's up there is going to have to be dedicated towards, green space. And we don't have any cost incurred in that, and we control a lot of that, of what he's going to be doing with that. So it might not be an urban park like, we
Right.
would all like to have, I'm sure. but
Well,
it would be free.
And I think the issue there becomes, because this is the issue we have with Mr. Zuccarelli in the past, was he couldn't come up with a viable development plan and accomplish that goal, given the cost of that property. So again, that's, I think, goes back to Mayor Watkins' point, which is, you may find, depending on what the utilization is going to be, you may find that people, there's interest, but they have to come in and find out what they can actually do with the property. They got to be within code. They need to not be asking for any variances. We need to confirm through the village attorney just how much green space we can accomplish and what that actually looks like. Because it doesn't have to be just one parcel. It can be green space, quote unquote, spread throughout the entire development. So you may or may not end up with what you want. And again, as long as they're within code, we can persuade, hope they will be good neighbors. But as you know, we can't dictate. So that's the issue.
I wanted to just I wanted to bring this up, and it kind of goes off what you're saying, and I don't think it should sway our opinion of what we want to do either way, but we're talking about, say we don't purchase it and a developer does. A developer might not be the person purchasing it. It might be an investor, and
Could be.
I've seen so many deals where investor buys it, they come up with a plan, they need more funding, so they're trying to find someone for a joint venture developer, so it could be sitting for a very long time. Or a developer could swipe it up, has a great plan, it gets approved through here, and it's developing fast. You just don't know. Those are unknowns, but I kind of want to state that to set the expectation, like, it could get developed right away or it could sit for a long time still. We just don't know. It's out of our control, but I also don't think that should sway our opinion of what we want to do. I just kind of want to state that so everyone is really clear on what could happen there.
That's a good point. Jessica?
Yeah, I was gonna say, before her gets a little antsy. Hello, Jessica Namath at 20 Shady Lane. I would like to direct my comment to you and just hope that we don't limit where us mothers are walking all the time, because if you look around, you'll see the same parents out pushing almost aimlessly in circles. And the more parks we have the options of going to, the better. So if there was a splash park, I'm all for the urban park and having different variations. You can bring your dogs to Remembrance. We can go to the playground over at Constitution. But when it is Tequesta Fest time, you see people walking, they're coming out to the streets, they're walking to Tequesta Fest. When we look at the turnout at Constitution, when we have the food trucks, the numbers are huge. I mean, the whole village, it seems like, turns out for those. So if there's somewhere where there's some music, or there's an amphitheater, a space that could be, an urban park, I really don't, I think we need not underestimate the number of residents that would definitely use it. And again, for us mothers, the more options we have, the more we will use. And I live just outside of the country club, off Point Drive there, and have no problem walking, to Paradise Park. There's just no reason as of right now
To go.
to go there, because you can stop at Perk and grab something to eat and then go to Constitution with the kids, or it's not family friendly, so to speak, to walk that far for right now. But if there was something there, I would urge you not to underestimate that us mothers with children would happily walk there as a variation to our daily rotation of what to do and where to go. And I definitely think the residents would use it. So I just wanted to express that.
I'll just add real quick. I completely agree with you. I mean, this past week I rode my bike with my 13-year-old to the beach.
Right.
Right? We can do it. And had a great bike ride and saw the sunrise. It was beautiful, loved it. My fear is we don't have the ability to afford this park. And I wish we did. And I do not have I have not heard of a suitable way of coming up with a source just to maintain it, and not to purchase it.
I understand that, and I think that the avenue of seeing if we could get a lease extension or speaking to the family that owns it, letting them know how much it means to the community, I think that is a great, I don't think we should not explore that to the fullest extent of whatever we're able to, because if we can buy ourselves some time here, we can come up with more options or see what the grant, what's out there, what is available to us. But I do understand that there is a time constraint as it is, which leads me to believe that we need to really speak to the owners and see what they're willing to do to help the community, because I do think it could be a phenomenal spot and that we would certainly utilize it. and it's got so much potential, you know, so I would urge us to explore those options and see how much time we can buy ourselves. Thank you.
Jessica, thank you. And we are doing that. Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Cynthia Quinn, and I'm from Chapel Court in Tequesta. I've been a resident here for 38 years. I've seen some of the projects. I've been to the meetings for different things that we've had here in the village. I was at the workshops when we redid all of US 1 and added a turn lane into the Bell's Shopping Center. I've seen this linear park. I thought it was just a sidewalk to keep people off of getting killed on Old Dixie Highway,
It does that too.
Yeah, but that's the only reason I see for that. If you want to see Dog Park, please go to Tequesta Park. They've just redone it as per your newsletter, so you'll be able to see lots of animals there if you so choose to see a dog park. Paradise Park, I think, is something that this village needs. As many people have said, it is the only green space we have left. We have numerous businesses in this community, buildings with nobody in them. Main Street has 2 or 3, the drugstore, the workout gym and such. I think it's important that we try to utilize some of those spaces. Tequesta Corporate Center has, I think, 2 tenants in it currently. In order to utilize those spaces, get people back to, why did we name it Main Street if it's not? It's a roadway between PNC Bank and the jet ski place, and a back way to get to CVS. What else did we do with it? We haven't done a thing. Another thing you might consider, maybe we could have that Tequesta Fest more than 5 hours on a Saturday. It takes 3 days to put it up and 3 days to take it down, and for 5 hours, it's a waste of time. You might think about leasing out the boat that the village of Tequesta has too. We don't have, a lot of smuggling up the intercoastal in Tequesta, so thank you.
You're very welcome. Yes, Marcia. Yes, one more comment.
I'll be the last. I'm assuming that you're thinking that if you get the lease, you get a year that you can't sell if the lease is in play?
We're not assuming anything. We're saying we want to initiate discussions with her to extend the lease. If it extended on its current terms, that would include the right of first refusal as well. And I guess the question is, how long a term would they give us? The Vice Mayor mentioned a year. Maybe it's 6 months, but I mean, we've got.
So it's a little bit of play.
Yeah, September is when it expires. So even if we got 6 months, that would take us to basically March.
The other thing about Tequesta Fest, in order to have those rides, you have to have hard surface. So what you've got now, which is ghastly looking, suits Tequesta Fest just fine. So if you have green space, you're not going to have those rides.
Well, you probably still maintain some parking over there, but you're right. You'd have to, that would be a consideration.
Which is okay with me. I get sick.
All right. Jeremy, did you have anything more you wanted to cover this evening?
No, sir. I addressed the 3 issues that were tasked with me, and so I have nothing else.
I just have one quick comment. It was something that Mrs. Watkins very quickly tapped on. If we were to, let's say, take a loan to pay for however much it is, we asked the residents, would you be willing to pay this much more every year? Is it worth it to you? And again, I would need a price tag for that.
Agreed.
But I would not be opposed to asking the residents,
Well,
is it important to you, would you pay this much more for that property, so that we utilize year-round?
Well, one of the things we did with the community center is we really developed a robust questionnaire, as you know. And I'm perfectly fine with putting that to the residents and saying, look, there may be a number of ways of funding this, one of which might be whether we did a bond issue or whether we increased taxes by a certain amount in order to underwrite the cost, and let the residents tell us. Is that something they'd be in favor of?
And I'm fine if they say no, I just want to ask them.
I agree 100%.
Yes, I need a price tag first.
Well, we got to develop a
Come to that
concept.
price tag.
And we've got to go out and do the community meetings and inform and educate people to give them an opportunity to provide us that feedback and to respond appropriately.
I have a question.
Yes.
At what price would you say that it is not reasonable?
Depends on what kind of funding we can get from other sources.
Let's say you can get 100%. Or let's say, at what point, let's say you can get 75%. You've been mentioning this grant that will provide 75% of the funding, so
I
6 million, that means 1.25. Would you be?
Be 1.5. But yeah, I mean, I can't really answer that, Kyle. I mean, do I think it would be worth spending $750,000 of the village's money to acquire that property if we could get the rest of it in the form of grant funding? Or maybe even up to $1 million, I would probably say yes. I mean, we do have some additional revenues that would be forthcoming. We're going to need some of those for other purposes, but we have, Sea Glass coming online in 2023. That's going to generate probably $800,000 to the village. We've got the Australia building coming online. The reserve appears to be going forward next to Casa del Sol. So we do have some additional revenue sources that could feed in and assist us, but that's part of what Jeremy's working on now with the budgeting process.
So purchase price over $1 million you're okay with?
If, potentially.
Well, I'm going to say in summary, is that I look at every dollar that we decide to spend on whatever it may be or purchase whatever we may be, as if it's my own money. And I'm trying to manage my household budget. And when I know that I got $16 million worth of water main replacement that I'm going to have to do over the next 10 years because we don't have the money to replace them right now. Some of them are over 60 years old. And we have to spread that replacement out. That's just one item that I know that I've got to spend in the next 10 years. And it could go up. It could go to 20 million over that period of time. And I'm sitting here thinking, okay, well, I really want this new boat out here, and man, oh man, I'd have a lot of fun with that thing. I can get a loan for really cheap. I can go out there. It's only going to cost me, $200 or $300 a month to buy this boat. I can take my family out in it. We can go spend the weekends and stuff in it. So I go out and buy that boat, and then I have a big water main break there, and all of a sudden I got to go spend, X amount of money on that. Well, I don't have the money because I just bought that boat. And that's not a very good analogy, but, realistically, we can't even fix what we've got broken now, and we can't develop what we already own, and we're trying to figure out a way to spend more money. And I'll just tell you, from a business guy standpoint, and juggling dollars and stuff, because that's what you have to do when you try to make a profit at a business, and it's hard sometimes, to justify in my mind going out and spending money that we don't have. If we had the reserves like Jupiter did, it was in the paper, they just bought all that property, kudos to them, great, they had that money, they struck a check for that land, they didn't have to go out and borrow a penny. If we had that money.
Bruce, actually, they did borrow that money.
Long time ago.
They have a bond.
It was bonded money and stuff, but it was bonded money.
The other
But
thing
still, again, they had the money in their tills to do it with.
Right,
We don't have bonded money sitting
right.
there.
The only thing I wanted to say is, because I don't want people to be confused, the water distribution system, you're right, we obviously have put into place a capital plan to replace the piping, and I'd like to see it accelerated as well. But that money doesn't come from the village. That comes.
I was using that example.
Well, no, I know, but I don't want people to be confused thinking that we're taking village revenues and using it on the utility, because they're two distinct financial entities. So, but I understand what you're saying, and I don't want to spend money foolishly either. I guess the question is
roads and sidewalks?
Is the park a good investment?
Roads and sidewalks?
We have a capital plan to address those things. So this would be, we're not talking about taking money away from the capital plans that we've already developed, that we've already earmarked. We're talking about trying to look for,
Frank,
obviously.
when was the capital plan started? When did we start that?
Well, theoretically, it was started years ago, but it wasn't really until Jeremy got here and we really kind of put the pedal to the metal and really developed a strong plan.
This is an actual plan where we actually have funding sources
Correct.
to it, that we're actually starting the process of maintaining
Correct.
the bridge, the sidewalk, we did that, the roads. We are starting to maintain the things that we already have.
Of course.
And we have things, property already that we have not maintained, just sitting there.
I'm not disagreeing with you.
So again, I don't even see the ability to maintain a park in our general fund budget. If we
Well, we're maintaining parks now. and
we're not
we've got-
maintaining DeQuesta Park.
Tequesta Park.
Is not being maintained.
It's a different situation for the reasons we've already talked about.
It's not being maintained.
We are putting some money into it, but it's state land, and again, it needs probably a $6 to $8 million capital investment, which I would not even begin.
Can we afford that?
No, and even if we could, I
You
would,
just answered
no,
it.
even if we could, I would advocate against it, because it's state land.
It's
and
$6 million we can't afford.
It's open to everybody, but we're not talking about spending $6 million. We're talking about securing resources from outside the village to underwrite the cost.
So $6 million is too much.
I'm saying 6 to 8 million into something we don't own, we only lease, that's open to every resident in the state of Florida. That should not be on the back of Tequesta taxpayers.
So last question I've got for you. Would we recommend that this urban park be closed to anybody outside of the village of Tequesta?
No.
So it'd be open to anybody in the area?
Yeah, but we still own it. It's a different, and we control it from a legal standpoint, from a law enforcement standpoint, from every other standpoint.
You know, we control Tequesta Park right now legally and from a law enforcement side.
No, we do not. We can patrol it, but we cannot take any action within Tequesta Park unless Martin County specifically gives us authority to do so, because it lies within Martin County. But
So-
not only is it state-owned land, it doesn't even lie within Palm Beach County.
So I'm gonna disagree with you on that, and I don't know if we can get the chief to come in and answer that.
I've
Just
already
get
talked to the chief about it, so I already have clarification on that point.
Okay, I disagree.
So,
Cool.
so what as the mayor, I'm not going to make a motion. I would like to suggest something, however. I'd like to suggest that we go ahead and authorize the village manager to at least get the appraisals so that we know what we're looking at. As he's already indicated, it's a fairly minimal expenditure, and that we also seek to extend the lease for as long as we possibly can to give ourselves the time that we need to fully address and vet this within the community to get community feedback, because as I said earlier, no one of us speaks for everyone in this village. They did elect us, they do want us to use good judgment, but I think this is such an important issue that that judgment needs to be taken, we need to take into account the feedback from the residents, and we haven't had an opportunity to really gather that.
Okay, so let me ask you this. I mean, can we decide tonight whether we go ahead and move forward with the appraisal, $3,000 to $4,000, which I'm fine with, and then also finding out the extension time, and then also finding out how long it will take us to find out if we can be guaranteed of getting grant money, because I am not going to be an advocate of it, and I only have one vote, but I'm going to tell you right now, if it's going to make dollars and cents for me, it's going to have to be really cheap for me to go jump on board to create and buy this park. And right now, I'm not seeing it. And so, I mean, like I said, I'm just one vote out of 5. So, I mean, but bottom line is, unless we can make, financial sense for the village to purchase this and develop it and maintain it, but I'm all for spending what little bit of money that we have to go out and find that out. But I don't know how you're going to find out about the grant money that quick or not. If it's 6 months or a year that he's given, but I'd be really surprised if he extends it much longer. He's in the peak of the market right now, and if I was a seller and I wanted to sell my commercial piece of property, I wouldn't be hanging around waiting for the village to make up their minds whether or not they want to pay me, the money for it, and I got developers and stuff ready to write a check for it. So I'd be pleasantly surprised to find out that they're going to give you a longer extension than 6 months.
Well, we won't know that if we don't ask.
Hey,
Well, that's
Jeremy,
what I'm saying. We're going to move forward with that and find out about it, but I'll be surprised if we do get it much longer than 6 months.
Jeremy, can you explain again one more time why we do 2 appraisals, or why we just don't do 1?
Well, the 2 appraisals is to satisfy the open records, to allow us to keep the discussions or the negotiations private. And so if you have 2 of them, there's a state statute that says if you have 2, you are able to keep that discussion private until you actually bring it to council in a formal setting to approve that contract. So it's not required just if we want to go through there, but know that any developer, any citizen will be able to get the appraisal and get the negotiations that we have and that'll be open to the public.
And do you have the cost for each one of those appraisals?
Well, I just have the one, $3,000, yeah.
Do you think the other one will be similar?
I think it'll be very similar. Maybe less, but I think $3,000 is pretty close to what we're gonna get.
I'm not in favor of spending money on an appraisal unless we know that they're willing to extend the lease if they're willing to subdivide it into, sell it into 3 different sections, and what their asking price is.
And that makes perfectly good sense. I mean, why
There's
go
no-
buy an appraisal, get an appraisal done on it, but, you're not gonna get one overnight, so I mean, we've
Right.
got plenty of time to
Right.
find out these other caveats.
We can
and
find
stuff.
this
He
out.
said about 4 weeks, it would take him about 4 weeks to do it. This
Okay.
particular person, I mean, if I go out and get a second one. So then the question would be to you guys, if you guys do approve one, are you gonna approve both, or are we just gonna go through one? So you guys will have to make that decision as well.
I believe, yeah, I don't see the real advantage of trying to keep our appraisal secret. I mean, it's eventually all gonna come out, and the developer, anybody that's gonna wanna come in and buy it, they're gonna have their own as well. I mean, so they all should align with one another. I mean, it's not like got a trade secret here, on what these things actually appraised for.
And if we can extend the lease, then we have the first right of refusal, so
Yeah.
to me, we're gonna find out what that price,
Yeah.
market price is.
Exactly.
If they come forward with a bona fide offer, otherwise, we may be looking at an appraised value that we come up with and perhaps offering that to them if we were to decide ultimately
If we can
to
find a
seek to
funding
acquire.
source, if we can find a funding source for all that, then maybe we do ask for that second appraisal.
So, Bruce, were you making a motion?
Yeah, I mean, I'll make a motion that we proceed ahead with getting one appraisal, and then also seeking the extension, and then also trying to find out what the time frame would be for a potential grant, and how long, and how much that grant would potentially be for.
So this is a workshop, right?
No, this is a special
council
council meeting, we can vote on this.
For the sake of clarity, he mentioned, and I just want to get clarity still, he mentioned not moving forward with the appraisal until we can see if we get the extent, is your motion contingent upon that?
No, it's not, and I agree with Kyle on that. I mean, that we need to find out about the extension and all the other pertinent information and stuff before we go ahead and get it done, but, I mean, we can find that out this week, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, within a day or two, and then so, yeah, I mean, if everything lines up, then I would say go ahead and proceed with getting the appraisal. Do we want to set a time frame though, on how long, the extension we're gonna need in order to adequately analyze the potential purchase and development of Paradise Park? I mean, I think that's something that we might need to decide tonight on, and try to figure out, what are we willing to, do on it and the time frame on it.
So I don't think we should talk timeframe, just for negotiating purposes. I'm not sure that would ever come up against us, to use it against us.
Mm-hmm.
I think we leave it open, but finding out exactly what their asking price is. Would they extend the lease, and would they separate the lots? I
I'm more
think
interested if they're gonna separate.
Once we have all 3 of those, then I think that will help us go from that point. Yes, that price seems reasonable, let's go get an appraisal from that point.
Well, I don't guess we really need to decide on whether or not we would be happy with, one of the parcels, 2 of the parcels, 3 of the parcels or not. I don't know if we need to really kind of get into that discussion or not, but I think that the fact that would they separate it,
Yep.
Is certainly a viable question, to seek out from the owners.
I would suggest that, I think we should go ahead and go forward with the appraisal, because I think first of all, they may not come back to us with a definitive price. They have not received a bona fide offer at this point in time. And if they don't receive a bona fide offer, as the manager said, the only appraisal they've sought so far has been the estate appraisal. I think we need the appraisal from our vantage point, so we have a value that that has been fairly arrived at. And then whatever they come back with, we've got that as a counter, as an offset. So, I think the original motion, or the original discussion you had was move forward with the appraisal, move forward with the lease extension, and then I don't disagree with what Kyle's saying as far as trying to ferret out some additional information as to what they might be willing to do in addition to the lease extension. Although, if they give us the lease extension, some of those elements could always be worked out at a later point in time if they needed to be.
Well, who's going to research the grant opportunity? Because I don't think, to me, if we don't get a grant, there's no way financially it's going to be a feasible project, in my opinion, to do without getting grant money.
We'll get Ryan, I sent him an email while we were sitting here. He's pretty good at responding. We'll get him to see the status of that grant to make sure the one that, in particular, that we're talking about, make sure it's getting renewed and it's getting funded again.
Mm-hmm.
typically, it didn't open until September of last year, so we'd have a couple months before it even opens, but the important thing is see if it's got funded from the state.
Yeah.
So it sounds like we're all in agreement with one appraisal.
Mhm.
I guess can you explain the pros, cons, why you would want it to have a private versus not? I mean, I don't really understand pros, cons of each. It's hard for me to make a decision
Two
on
would
that.
mean that the appraisal information and any negotiations that we have are kept confidential until it comes to the council for an approval.
Right.
If we only go with one, somebody can request a freedom of information to request it, and any information we have to divulge.
Right, but what are the pros and cons of each? I mean, what is the reason for keeping it private from the public?
Only if you think that releasing that information would give another potential buyer some kind of a benefit price. But I'm okay with one at this point.
So Jeremy, when you ask them, I mean, can you ask well, you can ask them anything you want, I guess, but to find out will they accept, you know, I mean, because, you know, like if you go get a loan for a house or whatever, the banks usually have their own appraisals. They appraising companies that they will only use, and, you know, in giving you a loan. So, you know, we're going to go, I mean, $3,000, I mean, it is not a lot of money when we're talking about the size of this potential purchase and stuff. But, I mean, we go out, is that going to be a starting point for us? Or they accept that? Are they going to sell it for a price? And so are you going to ask them all those questions? Is that?
I will.
Okay.
So Bruce, would you restate your motion, please?
My motion is that we move forward with the appraisal once we find out, you know, the guidelines and stuff that we've all talked about here and stuff. I mean, I don't think I need to go over all that again and stuff. And that we check on the grant amount and we proceed forward with getting the appraisals.
And the lease extension.
And of course, the lease extension. Those are the only peripheral things.
Well, I guess I don't, you said once we find out this information, but wouldn't we have to, like, have another meeting to decide on the appraisal after that? Can we?
Yes.
So we're just pushing the appraisal to another meeting then, the next meeting?
Unless we set the guidelines for moving forward with the appraisal tonight, which I don't think would be that difficult. I mean, if they're going to give us the extension, and that's why I was saying, are we good with a 6-month extension or a year extension or whatever we're going to be? And I mean, we don't need a lot of time, so can't we go ahead and decide that tonight without having to have a meeting to decide whether or not we're going to get an appraisal or not?
Well, I mean, 6 months would give us 10 months. A year obviously gives us that much more time, but I'm in favor of moving forward with the appraisal concurrent with these other efforts, because I just think having that appraisal, it's going to take 4 weeks, having that appraisal, having that information, knowing what the value comes back at, I think then when we go into our next discussion on this topic, we haven't. So I think there's some benefit to us, and as you said, the cost is, in my mind, is minimal.
It is, and I agree with you on that. Go ahead and get the appraisal would be what I would recommend and be done with it. I mean, we've been talking about it now for a month or more, so I mean, let's go ahead and get the appraisal done, and let's get this thing over with. Let's figure out if we're going to make it viable or not.
So it's the appraisal, it's the lease extension, and it's looking into how they might want to sell the parcels, as the Vice Mayor described. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
So I'm against it, just in the aspect, I just don't think we should spend any money towards this. I don't see any reason or a way around it.
Okay. 4-1, it's approved. Okay, Mr. Bradford?
Would you clarify one thing?
Yes, sir.
Is Jeremy supposed to ask the owner how much money they want for the parcels?
He's going to, I think he's going to have discussions with him, and that
Okay.
could come up in the topic,
Yeah, 'cause
in the
you know,
discussions.
You buy a house, you don't walk around and
I
look
know.
at it without asking the owner how much you want for it.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, please, I think.
I think I know Jeremy and
It's the asking price.
Mayor Brennan had met with them when Mayor Brennan was still on the council, and I've had one meeting with them. And at that point, they were not forthcoming with a quote-unquote an asking price. They had done the estate appraisal. They had talked about, as Jeremy mentioned, doing a second appraisal to get a current value, but I think I think honestly, and Jeremy will correct me if I'm wrong, I think they're looking at us to come forward with an appraisal of our own that kind of puts a value on that property, unless they have a bona fide offer from another buyer, which my understanding is at this point they do not.
Well, have they actually listed it for sale?
I don't believe they have officially listed it for sale.
That's probably why they don't have somebody yet.
Well, they've had inquiries, I know that, but,
They had that inquiry, that's my understanding as well.
okay.
Can I ask for clarification there?
Yes.
So the motion is Bruce Prince for directing the manager to obtain an appraisal on the property, to seek an extension from the owner, to find out grant funding timeframes, to inquire on asking price, and to find out if they would separate the lots.
Correct.
Thank you.
You got it. So that's approved 4-1. Okay, any other comments from the council tonight?
I'd like to thank everyone that came. That's awesome of you.
Definitely.
Thanks for being part of it. And everyone that's listening, I know you're listening.
Anybody else? And Jessica, thank you for allowing me to bend your ear for an hour and a half last week. We had a very good conversation. All right, thank you, everybody, for attending. Oh, wait, motion to adjourn, sorry.
I'll
Motion.
make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you for all the input.